no personal agenda, only did what God wanted to do. And then, when God wanted him to die on the cross, he was willing to do that also. Total trust. He knows that if he dies, because God tells him to die, then God will raise him up just as he promised him that he will raise him up on the third day.
We fall down, we lay our crowns at the feet of Jesus. The greatness of his mercy and love at the feet of Jesus. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lamb. We fall down, we lay our crowns at the feet of Jesus. The greatness of his mercy and love at the feet of Jesus. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lamb. We cry, holy, holy, holy. We cry, holy, holy, holy. Holy is the Lamb.
We have the nation of Israel coming out of Abraham, and they try to do it, but there is a problem. The problem is sin. Sin is now mastering them. So even though they try to live by God's laws are given to them, they're unable to do that because of the nature of sin that is in them. They constantly keep failing in this thing that they set out to do. They are supposed to show the world what a man will be like if he trusted in God, what a nation will be like if they depended on God and trusted in God. And whenever they showed it, they were like a shining light to the world, to those that were around them. But many times they failed, and they became enslaved, and they suffered as a result, and so on. So their story is a story of constant failure, defeat, and again being restored, and so on. That's how the rest of the Old Testament moves. And then in the New Testament, we have Jesus coming into the picture. So we saw the work that Jesus did as a model for all our work. In John 5:17, I read last week, Jesus says, my Father continues to work. He has never stopped. He continues to work. And I also must work, he says. So he's talking about working. The Father is working. First he worked 6 days and rested 7th day, and then he didn't constantly rest. He's been working. He made a great plan, great scheme, the plan of salvation, a master plan. You know, big structures, big projects take a long time to plan and execute. So over the ages, God, for centuries together, is bringing his plan to pass, speaking through the prophets and through the patriarchs and so on, revealing his plan of salvation. That's the Old Testament. But then he sends his son Jesus, and he also comes and works. He heals, and he preaches and teaches and so on. He does the work, and he says, I don't do anything on my own. Whatever the Father does, that I do. Whatever the Father says, that I speak. I have no personal agenda. I am here to do my Father's will. It is my meat to do the Father's will. Here is a different kind of man. He comes from a different culture, different society. Even though he was born in the Jewish culture, the Bible says, when the fullness of time came, Jesus was born of a woman, just like all of us. And then it says, born under the law. That means he's born culturally attached to the Jewish culture. He was part of the Jewish community. That means he was obligated under the law, to the law, and to the systems and to all the things that they followed. So he grew up in a particular culture. So culture literally makes you. You become the product of your culture wherever you are, usually. But Jesus was different. He grew up in that culture, but when he grew up and started ministering, they hated him because the people of his own, people from his own Jewish community, many of them, the religious leaders, hated him because he was going contrary to their culture. They thought he was totally against their culture. What happened to Jesus? He's now trying to make a new society and a new culture. He sees there are many things that are wrong with the Jewish society and the culture. They have misunderstood the laws of God. So in the Sermon on the Mount, he interprets them correctly. And they have misunderstood the law concerning Sabbath. So they think that he has violated Sabbath so many times as he heals the people. But the fact is, he is the only one that is fulfilling the Sabbath as God said. He said, this woman, one time, been bound by Satan for 18 years, about that sick woman, bent over for 18 years. She's been bound for 18 years by Satan, and I'm releasing her. He said, I set you free. He said, I loose you, woman. He said, is it not right to release that woman? That's the Sabbath. Sabbath is to give rest to the woman who had no rest for 18 years. That's the true Sabbath. He was the only one that ever truly observed Sabbath. Everyone else failed to observe Sabbath and understood Sabbath in the right way. But yet they misunderstood him constantly. They were in conflict. He was going against the culture, they thought. But Jesus came to bring a new society and a new culture. His work was based on that. Now, I am saying that we all come from different professions, whatever our professions are. I'm a preacher. You may be something else. We're all differently gifted and are in different professions and so on. But it doesn't matter. We all have one basic work, and our work is to create a society and a culture. Behind all our work is the big picture concerning work, that is to create a society and a culture. That's what we're trying to look at, because when you understand that, then you will understand how your work must go. So, Jesus worked, and we saw about his life and ministry. And today, I want to go into talking about his work on the cross and the resurrection. Work on the cross and the resurrection. Now, that is why I asked you to turn to Philippians chapter 2. And I want to read to you from verse 5 to 11. It talks about the cross and the resurrection. Here's Paul's teaching on the cross of Christ and the resurrection of Christ. He says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. See, to the new society that has now come into being, the church, God expects them to have a new kind of culture. So Paul teaches saying, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Think differently, he says. Don't think like everybody around you is thinking. You be a different kind of people. Think differently. Let this mind, not the world's mind, not the mind of your community, wherever you come from. Let this mind, which was in Christ, be in you also, he says. Who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. Look at his way of thinking and doing things. He was in the form of God, but did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. But made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. See, he was God, equal with God, but he did not think it something to snatch onto, hold on to. He was ready to give it up. Made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, coming in the likeness of men. He gives it up voluntarily and comes in the form of men. And then he says, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even to the death of the cross. Now here, is a man who goes to the ultimate end of trusting in God. He shows how much a man can trust in God. He comes in the form of man. He comes as a man into this world, takes on humanity. God becoming man. He was ready to go. When God commissioned him to go and be the Savior, to die on the cross, he was willing to go. So he took on human flesh, born through Mary in this world, and grew up and lived among us. But then when it came to dying, it says he became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Now this is ultimate obedience. Here is a man that is totally given to God. Like I said, he spoke only the words that God gave him every day to speak, and did only the things that he saw God doing. No personal agenda, only did what God wanted to do. And then, when God wanted him to die on the cross, he was willing to do that also. Total trust. He knows that if he dies, because God tells him to die, then God will raise him up just as he promised him that he will raise him up on the third day. Total trust. Just imagine. He closes his eyes and dies and gives up his spirit. Father, I commend my spirit into your hands, he says, and dies. Totally believes and trusts God that he can never lie, that God will raise him up on the third day. A lot of people will say, well, that's a big risk, brother. If you close your eyes and never open it again, you'll be finished. Nobody will know who Jesus is. He'll be dead and gone. Only the grave will be with us. But he says, no. On the third day, he will raise me up. He has promised and he has spoken about it. He believes it completely. And not only raise him up, but he will also give him the glory that he had with the Father at one time. He has already prayed about it. He believes it totally, wholeheartedly. He completely trusts in God. This is a different culture that even the Jewish people at that day could not understand. He belongs to a different kind. Completely trusts in God. He is our example. He says, let this mind be in Christ, be in you, which was also in Christ. Paul is saying, you be like that, he says. Totally trust God. Do whatever he wants you to do. Completely abandon yourself to him and trust in him, because you can never fail when you trust in God. And look at the example of Jesus, he points out. He says he trusted him and obeyed him even to the point of death on the cross. That's what I want to talk about today. And the resurrection. Because he died obeying God, then verse 9 says, therefore God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name. That at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those in heaven and of those in earth and of those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. All right, let's talk about the cross first and then the resurrection. Then we'll talk about how these two things and what happened there is the model for a new society and a new culture. The cross of Jesus Christ. Now, before Jesus died on the cross, in the Roman Empire, people were put to death on the cross. Cross, culturally for the Romans, meant this, that those who went against the nation and caused some trouble in the nation, acted against the nation's interest, and caused some kind of upheaval in the nation, they were committing what you call sedition. Those kinds of people are considered great criminals, and those are the kind of people that deserved death on the cross. So in the Roman mind, under the Roman Empire, at that time when Jesus lived, the cross meant that only the worst criminals of the day, particularly those that went against the Roman emperor and the empire and caused some kind of unrest in the empire, caused sedition, committed sedition, they are the ones that are put to death in that way, in that shameful, horrible way on the cross to die. So the cross stood to them as the worst place to die for the worst criminals. Most undesirable people died on the cross, particularly those that committed sedition against the empire. Now, the Jewish people also had their own traditional, cultural view about the cross. For them, it seems like the Apostle Paul says in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. As it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree. Now he's referring to an Old Testament verse where it is written that the one who dies by hanging on a tree is cursed. And in talking about Christ's death, he could have simply said Christ died, took our curse, and he could have run through it like that. But he does not. He says Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. As it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree, so that the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles and that we may receive the promise of the Spirit. Now, deliberately Paul talks like that. He could have said Christ died on the cross and he took our curse. But he said, as it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree. Where is it written that cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree? In Deuteronomy, this thing was taught to the people of Israel. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, let me read to you verse 22 and 23. This is what Paul is referring to there. Deuteronomy 21, 22 and 23. If a man has committed a sin deserving of death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, this body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day. Now notice, it says, if a man commits such a terrible, some kind of crime, it has to be a terrible crime, worthy of a death sentence, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree. This is the mode of punishment that is given to him, or this is the way that death is administered to him. You hang him on a tree. His body shall not remain overnight on the tree. He said, when you do that, don't let that body remain on the tree. Why? He gives the reason. But you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. What he's saying is, if you let the body hang on the tree, it's going to be having an adverse impact upon the nation, he says. For he who is hanged is accursed of God. They were taught that the person who hangs on a tree and dies is a very hard criminal if he is worthy of such a death. When you hang him, bury him before sundown. Don't let the body stay on that tree overnight. Because the one who's hanged is accursed of God. So the Jewish people, as part of their culture, thought of the cross, dying on the cross, as something as being cursed of God. A person who dies in that way, it's a horrible way to die. That person is accursed of God. The curse of God is upon him. And they have been instructed to bury him before sundown, because if he is left to hang there all night, then the curse that is upon him will come upon the land flowing with milk and honey. This is the blessed land that God is giving them, the land of Canaan. They said, don't defile the land. Bury him before sundown. Now they follow it actually in practice. You read it in Joshua chapter 10, where Joshua possesses the promised land, and at one time he goes against 5 kings and wins the battle against 5 Canaanite kings. And because he was busy with the battle, he tells his people to shut them up in a cave and roll the stone over it. Let them stay there, and he'll finish the war and come. And then he comes back and gets them out and kills the 5 kings by hanging them on the tree. And after they're killed, before sundown, they're taken down and carefully buried, just following the instruction of Deuteronomy clearly. The interesting thing is, the same thing is done when Jesus dies on the cross. When Jesus died on the cross, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27, I think verse 52 or 57, somewhere there, it says that a man named Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus, and then took the body of Jesus and buried that body in his own grave. And it says, interestingly, in that verse, he did it when the evening had come. That means before sundown, he was careful to take the body and bury. The Bible is trying to tell us Jesus Christ died on the cross. As it is written, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. He died bearing our curse so that we can receive his blessings. He took our curse upon him. He died as a cursed one on the tree. Therefore, when the evening had come, Joseph of Arimathea went and took the body and carefully buried the body of Jesus, meaning that that curse that belonged to us, that was now placed upon Jesus on the cross of Calvary, should not ever again come upon any one of us. It should be forever done away and gone. When Jesus was buried in the grave, our curse was also buried, never to come out of it. That's the picture you get. And Paul literally says it like this: cursed is everyone that Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. As it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree. So that the blessing of Abraham might come. So that the curse won't come on you, because it's buried with Jesus and gone with Jesus, ended with Jesus, so that the blessing now can come. What happened on the cross is not only the bearing of our curse and our sin, it's the burial of our curse and sin, so that we'll never see it again, so that the blessings can flow into our life. This is the way the Bible presents the whole story. So Jewish people, culturally, they believed that the cross was a place where a man who was cursed by God dies. The man died on a cross, he's cursed by God. That's the way they viewed it. So for the Romans, it's a man who committed sedition, the worst crime of the day. You can go against anything, but not against the empire. If you're gone against the empire, you're finished. You'll be hung on a cross, the worst form of death. And for the Jewish people, the worst thing that can happen to you is be cursed by God, and such a man hangs on a tree. This is the way they viewed. Culturally, this is what it meant to them. But when Jesus died, when Jesus was condemned to die on a cross, he never violated any Roman law or any Jewish law. Both the Romans and the Jews were very proud about their law and their system. The Jews were proud about the law that God has given, the 10 Commandments and their ordinances and all that, because it was all divine, God-given. They said there's no other nation that has laws like us. Very just, correct laws God has given to us. They took pride in that law, and they took pride in executing that law. They thought they were superior to all others. Romans thought the same thing. They thought they were a very superior nation. Their law and the system, they were very proud of it. There was some justice in the Roman Empire, and the laws such as you cannot simply beat a person if he is a Roman citizen. You have to take him to court, and the court must punish him and specify how many times he can be whipped. Only that many times he can be whipped. Only by authority of the court you can whip him. You cannot simply beat him. Paul takes those things, those privileges, because he is a Roman citizen. So the Roman government was a very systematic, had a very systematic law on their side, and they took great pride in the fact that they had very decent laws, good laws. There was justice in it. But now look at Jesus' condemnation. It's the worst thing that ever happened. They bring Jesus before the Roman official, the governor, and he inquires him personally and questions him. And then finally he comes to the conclusion that he sees no wrong in this man. This man has done nothing wrong. He calls the Jewish people and tells them, listen, I see nothing wrong with this guy. In fact, I'm going to wash my hands so that, I am not held responsible for killing an innocent man. So he washes his hands. Then strangely, after declaring, I see nothing wrong with this man, he has not violated any Roman law, he hands him over to be crucified, because there is a mob out there that is crying, free Barabbas and crucify Jesus, because of popular demand. Have you ever heard anything like this? Because of popular demand, not because he has violated anything. He himself, the Roman official, the highest Roman official of the day in that area, has declared that this man has not violated any law.
Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. He is risen. He is risen, and he resurrection of our Lord. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Everybody, celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. He is risen. He is risen, and He lives forevermore. He is risen. He is risen. Come on, celebrate the resurrection of our Lord. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. Celebrate, Jesus, celebrate. He is risen. He is risen. He is risen, and He lives forevermore. He is risen. He is risen. Come on, celebrate the resurrection. Oh, everybody, let's celebrate. He is risen. He is risen, and He lives forevermore. He is risen. He is risen. Come on, celebrate. Come on and celebrate. Come on and celebrate. Come on and celebrate. One more time. Come on and celebrate the resurrection of our Lord. Oh, let's clap our hands and praise the Lord, the risen Lord in our midst.